The first advantage is that here in Peru, we relate challenge with an opportunity. And we are very creative because in our lives we see a challenge, we need to solve this. Because sometimes the government is not necessarily present. For example, in Cornucopia, as we have a lot of challenge in the dynamic, we play and we have a very fun time. And you can establish this kind of relationship with the development team. And you start to deploy this kind of practices based on the relationship and based on the trust that they have in you.
Welcome to Season 4 of The Elephant in AppSec, the podcast to explore, challenge, and boldly face the AppSec elephants in the room. I'm Alexandra, your host, AppSec enthusiast, and growth manager at Escape. Today, I'm joined by Max Alejandro Gómez-Sánchez Vergaray, Defensive Cybersecurity Manager at Banco de Crédito BCP. With a background in software engineering, Max transitioned into AppSec and has become a leading voice in promoting DevSecOps awareness and building robust AppSec programs using SAMM across Latin America and beyond. He actively contributes to vast projects like Cornucopia and regularly offers free workshops in Spanish on secure design for digital products. If you would like to join a future session, check out the link below. In this episode, we dive into AppSec in Latin America, with a focus on Peru's unique cybercrime laws and their impact on security awareness. Max shares insights on the cultural challenges in cybersecurity training, the complexities of translating frameworks like Cornucopia, and what can get lost in translation. We also explore building connections in remote teams and what global developers can learn from Latin American approach. If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and follow it on your favorite podcasting app or YouTube. It's the best way to avoid missing future episodes. And with that, get ready to hear Max's opinions. Dive right in. Hi, Max. I'm super excited to have you on the Elephant and AppSec podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to have a chat with you, and especially now in that new season, like we're going to discuss what also changed through the past. When I was researching this episode, I mentioned that actually, like Peru, it stood out in Latin America as one of the few countries that actually have an independent law that specifically punishes and sanctions cybercrime, and it's pretty unique in that landscape. And why do you think it actually became so important in the country to enforce it legally? And did you see that it influenced a lot of organizations?
Yes, and at first I want to say hi. It's great to be here with you, and it's great to share this space that a lot of reference that I have share with you too. And I think that it's very interesting question because sometimes some companies need a regulatory framework to make the things more secure. But I think that in the pandemic, it allow us to start our digital transformation process because you can go to the street and buy things, especially here in Peru maybe especially here in Peru. I think that in other countries not necessarily was like this, but it gets very important because a lot of companies start its digital transformation process and not necessarily consider cybersecurity in this process. And when you have a regulatory framework that maybe require you to be more secure, you will need to comply with it. So a lot of companies start to adopt some standards, good practices. And here the law is in evolution too. It's not necessarily too hard like other countries, but it helps a lot. And I think that it helps us to make more strong the cybersecurity culture because you have one very important requirement from the law. So I think that is the first step because when you ask to a company to be more secure, you told them you have a regulatory framework that you need to comply with it. You can negotiate this. But maybe if you want to be more secure, you need to comply with this regulation and you need to adopt these standards. So why is it important? Because sometimes, 100% secure doesn't exist. You will always be insecure or as my Scrum Master teacher told me a few years ago, was you will never be Scrum or Agile. You will always be looking for be Agile. And it's the same in security. You will never be secure. You will always be searching for security. And to be more closer to be secure, you need to adopt standards, good practices, good methodologies, some tooling. And if you align your cybersecurity posture to international frameworks or standards, I think that you will always be in compliance with the regulatory framework.
I think, for example, the maturity potentially, in Latin America is different from like maybe international. Like in each country, it's actually very different. And I guess
Yes.
you've traveled, to OWASP, AppSec, and you probably had some conversations. And you presented there, and you had some conversations, I guess, with people from on a very different maturity levels. Like, how do you think the maturity, for example, in Latin America works? I think, especially when we talked before, you mentioned that the developer landscape is very fragmented. Like, you had to manage teams of thousands of developers scattered around multiple countries. Like, how do you analyze maturity there? How do you define it?
It's very interesting because the culture here is very different that the culture in Europe, and the culture issues in Europe are different than the culture issues that we have. For example, I don't know, you have a very strong law, a very strong regulations, but a very strong participation of the European Union too, for example. Here in Latin America, here in Peru, we not necessarily have this. So we need to adopt standards, like I told you before. In this adoption, we need to create an AppSec program to maybe we can use or maybe we can define a maturity in a better way. For example, I think that the best application security framework is a software assurance maturity model from OWASP. Like an example, I use it, and then we have a special and specific practices to guarantee the maturity of the developers, for example. And then we have developers here in Peru, developers in other countries. You need to ask them the same things, but probably the way that we will make the things was a little bit different. So, for example, I need you to consider security in coding. Yes, everyone will consider security in coding, but the way that they will consider security in coding probably will be different, because the background of developers of some countries sometimes is different than the background of developers here in Peru. I have background in developing, and I didn't knew how to code secure.
Yeah.
I knew how to consider some coding standards, but not necessarily secure. So at first, we need to identify what security gaps have in every team, in every development teams, because every country has its culture. Every development teams has a different culture with different motivations, with different objectives. So what I really need to make is to identify the gaps in every development teams. Starting with this assessment, we need to identify how can we solve these gaps or those gaps, and then start to creating mentoring programs, some training courses, some, I don't know, some kind of meetings or some kind of coffee times to solve the questions. So I think that this is the way that help us more in solve these different of cultures. And I prefer not to talk about cybersecurity practices, because if you tell to a development teams, hey, you need to use these cybersecurity practices integrated in your development process, probably they told you, hey, these are cybersecurity practices, not development practices. What I try to convince them is that there are not cybersecurity practices. There are a good development practices that contribute in cybersecurity. And we talk about the complete software development lifecycle, not only in coding. So we start to talk about abuse case modeling, to talk about threat modeling, to talk about testing, to talk about secure coding. So in this conversation, we ask the development teams, not only the developers, because there are the architects too, for example, and we ask them, or I ask them, hey, you need to have a good design. And cybersecurity or secure design
Yeah.
is a good design if you not consider necessarily security in your design.
Yeah.
There isn't a good design. So we try to focus the conversation in that way.
And on your side, because you mentioned, before that when you were a software developer, you didn't really know good security practices. How did you overcome that knowledge gap to actually get into security? How did you learn about AppSec from scratch?
How did I learn? That's a very that was very challenging because I wasn't know almost anything about security, only that I was learned being a developer. So I think that the first thing that I made was, the first certification that I take was the Scrum Master, because I need to understand how works how was or what was the differences between an waterfall processes with an agile process. And then I start to read a lot about different cybersecurity practices. I think that the first practice that I learned about was threat modeling. And then I start to read about DevSecOps because I was working in a digital transformation process. So I need to guarantee that this digital transformation process were secure.
Yeah.
I was very lucky because in this moment was my girlfriend and now it's my wife. She helped me a lot because I don't know where to start. And I found some playing card game called Cornucopia, but I don't have the cards and I don't have anything. And my wife gave me, hey, sweetie, I have framed those cards for you. And it was a very beautiful cards. I have them in my bedroom as a memory.
And that's very special place to keep the threat
Yes,
modeling
it
cards.
was. Yes, and I start to playing with these cards with a lot of first with one development teams, and then with more development teams. But this playing card game called OS Cornucopia not only have it has some different attack scenarios related in third person, but there has some standards related too. So when I read one card of OWASP Cornucopia, I discovered that was a safe code practical security stories. And then I started to look into safe code practical security stories. And then I found too the application security verification standard in a previous version. So I discover more OWASP standards or more OWASP good practices. Then when I look to application security verification standard, I discovered that exists that OWASP top 10. So I was looking for, hey, I have some curious to look at this standard, and this standard in OWASP is related with another standard and another standard and another standard. And then when I have a little disorder in my head, I start to identify some reference. And I add some of them to LinkedIn to ask some questions. And my past travel to Europe was very beautiful because I know them in person. I knew them in person. So, for example, Tanya Hanka in LinkedIn a few years ago, and she helped me a lot to maybe with some answers. I start to look to Isar Tarandak. And I saw his videos, and now I discovered Avi Dublin, and I saw his videos. I discovered Adam Shostak, and I saw his videos, and I add him to LinkedIn too. And I read the Common Knowledge Playbook of Certified Secure Software Lifecycle Professional. I have this certification, but at the beginning I only read the Common Knowledge Playbook, and then I discovered the Adam Shostak's book, Designing for Security. So one step takes me to another, and then I started in a very disordered way, but I started.
Yeah.
I started asking and solving questions. And then when I knew about software assurance maturity model, I can order my ideas and make a more structured application security program.
Everything then kind of came together and helped you understand how it works. And I think what you
It's a very beautiful story about your wife giving you cornucopia cards.
Yeah.
Not everyone in the family usually supports the security mindset, I would say. And how did you, because you mentioned like you on your side started working with first with one development team, then kind of expanded it. Do you have any like challenges translating it from one language to another, and maybe some terminology was a bit should have been a bit different? Like
Yes.
what would you change there?
Yes, and that's very beautiful too because I think that I have a lot of challenges, and today I have a lot of challenges.
Mm-hmm.
But at the beginning, I had a lot of challenges, but I have one advantage. My CISO trusts in me, and I have all his trust in my back, so I can blow up, and I have his support. But
That's nice to have.
yes, but it wasn't an open letter because I can try, and I need to try with my CISO's support. And today we are very close friends, and I say hi to him if he someday see me. But with this support, I start trying with one squad. But the cards are in English, not in Spanish.
Yeah.
And I hear the most of the people talk in Spanish. So
Makes
first challenge, the language. So I translate the Cornucopia by myself, and in that year I didn't remember that exists necessarily Google Translate, so it was very some difficult way to do.
Yeah.
I translate always Cornucopia, but when you translate some word or some phrases from English to Spanish, sometimes the meaning get lost.
Yeah.
So you need to understand what does the card means and not necessarily make exact translation of the phrases because sometimes the context get lost.
Yeah.
So I need to adapt the translation to maintain the context because we always try not to talk about the technologies or methodology. We always try to talk about capabilities, and what we really need to do is we need to consider the capability. We need to guarantee the capability. We need to guarantee that, for example, the attack scenario maintains in the translation. And it was the first step. Then I sent this translation to Colin Watson and said, "Hey, Colin." So this is another story because I found his mail in the OWASP listing list. And I brought them, "Hey, Colin, I'm from Lima, Peru. I have work in this. I don't know if you are interested to seek this." And he liked, and the official translation to Spanish is mine. So it was a first step to get involved in OWASP Cornucopia. But I started with one team and then goes to another team, but tell them, "Hey, you are not using, or I am not asking you to use Cornucopia to comply with cybersecurity. I ask you to use Cornucopia because in that way you will be able to identify security requirements and associate with the user stories." And this is another variation of the methodology that I defined in those years because I was convinced that Cornucopia was the best tool to make this relation. But I convinced those first teams because I told them, "Hey, if you don't identify what security requirements or what security task or what security characteristics you need to consider in your use case or in your user story or in your functionality, you won't be able to identify how much time will you take to finish this functionality." Because sometimes, I don't know, I put this example. Sometimes one team works in logging, in the login form, for example, but they not necessarily consider the security characteristics in the authentication process.
Yeah.
So they work in the login, but if they don't consider security, then some guy can raise his hand and tell them, "Hey, you work in the login, that's right, but it isn't secure, so you need to solve this." And probably it makes rework from the development teams. So that was the first challenge, that it wasn't defined in the organization. It wasn't defined here in Peru. Even in these days, it wasn't defined. We talk only about the secure software development process, but we don't talk about how to integrate this in every phase. So I need to knock every door and convince them. The most of them open the doors, but we have a lot of development teams that maintain their doors closed. And then came my CISO support because he told me, hey, you need to do this in some way, but you need to do this. And I think that this was the first challenge, the cultural challenge and the deployment challenge.
Yeah, I think cultural challenges are usually quite hard to overcome, for sure. Like, is there actually like OWASP Peru local chapter?
Yes. Here we have an Peru chapter from OWASP,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very interesting. Yes. I think that it's kindly new,
Yeah. Thanks.
but it's very good to have a chapter here because it helps the companies to adopt OWASP good practices.
Mm.
I don't know if it's a framework, but it is an organization that gives to the community a lot of good practices.
On your side, like you talked, a lot about challenges and problems and difficulties. Are there any like advantages or good things that you see that maybe culturally, apart from CISO helping
Yeah.
you, but like culturally that may be an advantage for like you for working, developers all across Latin American countries? Is there anything like in your experience that you saw actually the mindset as an advantage?
Yes, and I told you, I think a lot of times about challenges,
Mhm.
but I think that the first advantage is that here in Peru, we relate challenge with an opportunity. So the challenge not necessarily stop us.
Yeah.
So we have a challenge and we need to solve this challenge. And we are a very creative persons, a very creative, I don't know, people.
Mhm.
Because in our lives we see a challenge, we need to solve this because sometimes the government is not necessarily present, so
Yeah.
you need to solve the things by yourself, and that's a really good advantage because you are always solving challenges. You are always looking the beautiful part of the story and how to solve those challenges. And for example, in Cornucopia, as we have a lot of challenge, we are a very warm people, a very kindly people. So in the dynamic, we play and we have a very fun time. So they like a lot, and you can establish this kind of relationship with the development team. And sometimes there are not necessarily professional relationship. At the most of the times, it ends with a friendly relationship.
Mhm.
And you start to deploy these kind of practices based on the relationship
Mhm.
and based on the trust that they have in you.
Yeah.
And to work with people in other countries, it was a very rich opportunity too because they gave us a lot of learning.
Mhm.
Because it's always, I think in May was my first time in Europe, and this cultural interchange is always good. It always help a lot to understand how other people see maybe the same problem, but in different way. And it helps us a lot to us because having developers from other countries make us sometimes to see the problems in different way and let us identify different kind of solvings.
Mhm.
And it was very important because, I put Cornucopia as an example, but we make the same with the threat modeling with some tool. We make the same to identify vulnerabilities. We make the same to make the secret testing. But for example, we have one team and we play Cornucopia in what way with this team.
Mhm.
But probably we went to another team but has more technical background. And the way that we play Cornucopia with this team was different. And then we found a way to play Cornucopia virtually because at the beginning it was always presence.
Yeah.
Then,
Pandemic as well, and yeah.
yes, and then we need to identify how to play this virtually with
Maybe.
the participation of the rest of the team.
Mm.
I tell you the truth. Probably the most of the definitions in my work were made by me, but a lot of definitions came from the conversations of the development teams. Hey, I think that it might help you, but please you tell me what is the better way to play with you this? And they told me, hey Max, I know that you know about this, but I prefer to use this in that way. We maintain the objective, we maintain the methodology, but the dynamic were changed just a little. So I think that this openness of the people, this kindly of the people, this warmth of the people allow us to make the deployment of the the application security program more easy than if we were probably in another country or with a culture more cold or with a culture being less friendly. I think that in some case it was a challenge, but in most of the cases was a different advantage.
Yeah, I think for sure it can be a huge advantage when everyone is kind of has this mindset of being collaborative with
Yes,
one another, and then you can just iterate faster and learn from mistakes potentially faster. And someone is
yes,
not afraid, to tell you, actually, let's do it like this way, and your way doesn't really work for us. Instead of talking behind your back, which is always nice. Like in the beginning, you also mentioned you didn't hesitate to reach out to a lot of people on LinkedIn and asking questions, right? How would you maybe recommend someone to overcome their shyness and go and ask other people?
I think that at the beginning, some people need to identify from whom do I need to learn.
Mm,
For example, my dad, that he's not here anymore, but was always my best friend, and was with my mom and my wife, who encouraged me to keep going in this way, because it wasn't easy, the road, but they told me, encouraged me. And I think that at first they need to identify the support people. You need to identify a good leader that allows you to make mistakes and correct them. Because I was a volunteer, a teaching volunteer, and in this volunteer, I learned that the mistakes are not to I don't know, to sanctionate the person. You need to make mistakes to get a better person and make a better process. So for all of those people, I recommend them to identify a good leader that allow them to make the things, to maybe apply every little learning that they have and make mistakes and then correct them, and then to identify from whom they need to learn. Because, for example, if I need to learn about threat modeling, I have 5 leaders, 5 reference. If I need to learn about secure coding or maybe a complete view of application security program, I have 4, 3, or maybe 5 references. And sometimes they need to identify those references. And they can see some videos in YouTube. They need to be curious, because I think that being curious is probably the best way to learn, to understand, and to correct the things that probably we are not making the best way. So identify a good leader, identify references or reference, add them to LinkedIn. They are very good people. They are very kindly people, and ask them. And maybe first you need to identify some videos and learn from them, because in this way you not necessarily learn about the thing, about the topic. You learn about how does they think, because some reference has a point of view, another reference has a different point of view, and you need always to understand those point of view and make your own point of view, because nothing is written in stone, as we said in
Yeah,
Peru.
every organization and everyone's experience is just so different.
Yes, yes, and read a lot. You can read books, you can read the standards. You need to read books, and you need to read the standards. There is not option, because once one leader told me, it's not only what you know, is what you can do with your knowledge. Ask me, you know or you believe? If you know, tell me what the standard the things are like you are telling me. If you believe, please read one standard and then return to tell me why do you believe this. So you always need to read, to show videos, to contact person, and make mistakes. The best way to learn is making mistakes and correct them.
You mentioned that you recommend to watch videos on YouTube. Is there any video that or talk that kind of impacted you in some way?
A lot of videos, but I always remember value-driven threat modeling from Abby Duglin.
Okay.
an RSA conference from Shostak, threat modeling RSA conference. I think that was in 2019. And those videos helped me a lot to understand how to threat model, the importance of threat model. And for example, this video of Adam Shostak helped me a lot to understand how to threat model and why to threat model in a more structured way. And when I saw this video of Avi Duglen, I didn't use Cornucopia as I use
Mhm.
right now. I was starting to use always Cornucopia. And when I saw this video of Avi Duglen, I said, hey, what if I shift left this concept and take this modeling not to the architecture? Instead of the architecture, we take this model to an abuse case modeling focusing on the epics or the user stories. And it helped me a lot. And you know, Avi Duglen, it's wow.
Yeah.
Can see videos, for example, about how to define metrics in an application security program from the SAMM user day. There are a great lot of videos. I think that maybe it depends of the topic that you really need to learn.
Poster based on a topic with different talks so people can learn from
Yes.
that. And in this new season, I have one question that's ask each guest. So, what is your least favorite security buzzword or like buzzword that you consider, the most overrated or that you don't like?
I think that probably shift left is one
Why?
of those because I think that it may be I know it depends on how do you understand shift left. I think that at this time it gets overrated because some people are questioning if shift left works or no, focusing on the hard to is to identify and solve the vulnerabilities that you identify in the coding phase. But I understand shift left as a concept, not only focusing on the coding phase, is focusing on the all software development lifecycle and probably on the software lifecycle, not only the development. So if you take shift left, you can make I don't know, I won't use this only in the coding phase. I need to identify security defects in the architecture and design. And probably you can identify security defects in the requirements phase and the user story phases. And probably you can shift left more because you need to train the people. So I think that the concept in these days I don't probably is overrated, but I think that is one of the concepts that helped me more. But shift usually in English is I have this here and I shift.
Yeah.
So I prefer to use spread left because I maintain this. I have security here, but as a rain, I start to take security more left.
Gradually everywhere. Yeah, and spread
Yes,
it.
I
Okay.
prefer to use spread left. And I read one principle that I haven't heard a lot that works very good in Agile that is security just in time and value driven security. The both of them, because security just in time are related to the in Agile software development with the functionality. If you are working in one specific functionality or one specific requirement, you need this to be secure because sometimes I leave this here. Some people ask you, yes, but what is the minimum of security that I need to implement? Well, the minimum of security that you need to implement is the security that will go with your functionality. So probably you have, I don't know, 5% of the product going to almost production. So you need that this 5% has all the security that it needs. And value-driven security is because an organization that is traveling in this beautiful digital transformation journey, it's always a value-driven organization that develop pros value-driven and focusing on the most value that they can give. So you need to identify in security what is your value driven to. So you need to go with the value driven of the organization. So value driven security, shift left, security just in time probably are my preferred. And I have one more that is security everywhere, because in every step that you take, you need to guarantee the security that you really need in this step. Because at the end of the day, you need that a secure product is a consequence of a secure process,
Yeah.
not only a consequences of maybe I make some testing and I identify some flaws and identify some security defects, so I will solve them. No, you need to consider security as an intrinsic value of your product. And to make this, you need to guarantee that a secure product is a consequences of a secure software development process.
Yeah, I think on my side, I personally think that like if everywhere is probably better concept than just shift left, because you kind of, as you mentioned, even with the spread analogy, you kind of need to spread it everywhere, because otherwise there are things that you can miss and they don't potentially work or can even like sometimes you release a new update, you don't think through the flow specifically because it was not built from scratch, and then you miss the guardrail at some point. And I think that's the super important part. Thank you so much, Max, for coming on the show. It was a pleasure
It was a
chatting
pleasure.
with you. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. It was
No, it was great to be here with you. And it was a very beautiful moment for me being here. The people who work in cybersecurity, especially in AppSec programs, need to understand that we are cybersecurity applied in the secure software development process. What does it mean? For example, if I think only in cybersecurity, I can block all the vulnerabilities. And I know vulnerability goes to production. And that's a good way to think. But you need to make the software development process more flow, more easy to adopt the security practices, more easy to adopt the security methodologies, and more easy to adopt the tooling. Because I think that the tools and methodologies are only, as it says, the tools that let us to comply with some capability. And we need to understand this, we need to find some balance between how to apply cybersecurity in software development and how to contribute to the software development lifecycle.
Yeah, I think balance is definitely a hard thing
Yes.
to find, and it's just so much so different for every organization,
Yes.
every country, and continent, maturity level as well. Thank you so much, Max. It was
Thank you
a
so much.
pleasure.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for this time, and I hope to see you again soon.